Hey everybody, how you guys doing today? This is Jim from the Pain PT, and today we got evidence of the week, which I love to bring to all of you. If you like today's evidence, you find it helpful, give this a thumbs up so that it reaches more people. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. And again, if you are looking for help, reach out. That's what I'm here for, providing free resource, but also I can offer you one-to-one and group help if you're struggling. So today's evidence of the week. I'm going to come back to the brain today, and I always let you guys know and tell you that this is your brain, not your body. When we're looking at a lot of chronic pain, that the cause and the source of your symptoms is not coming from something wrong in your body, but it's coming from alterations at the brain level. And that's such a paradigm shift for us to take in, understand, and start to assimilate and then change, right? So we're not changing the body so much in terms of our focus of treatment, we're changing the brain. And when we do that, we can change the pain and the symptoms. And so one of the things I've always said, and I'll say it again here, that we've missed in modern medicine, and I believe is the major reason why the brain has yet to be fully implicated and included in diagnoses of chronic conditions is because we don't do brain scans. We don't do functional MRIs on people's brains with chronic conditions. That's only done in research. And we scan the whole body, right? We scan the whole body when somebody goes to the doctor looking for evidence of what could be wrong, but we don't scan the brain. So we're missing a major piece of information that could potentially provide information about someone's diagnoses. So I'm going to bring you through today's study, which was done this year, 2025. So it's fairly recent. And I chose this one just as an example of some of the data we're seeing from the functional MRI studies on the brain in relation to chronic pain. And so today's paper was about neck pain. But again, I always want to highlight when you say, well, I don't have neck pain, so doesn't apply to me. I don't want you to think this way because it's just one area of pain. Now, remember, pain, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, IBS, all of these functional disorders, fibromyalgia, all of them we will put into the same bucket here. Okay, chronic conditions, chronic pain, chronic somatic symptoms. But we're going to put them in the same bucket because we find similar data across um, all these different symptom clusters with the brain changes being very similar. But this one was in particular about neck pain, but it's going to highlight again how your brain is involved here and how there's alterations at the brain level. And that is what the problem is here. It's nothing to do with your body. Your body's completely and physically fine. You can do whatever you want with your body. Okay, so today's article from February 2025, Journal of Pain Research, titled Investigating Brain Structure and Functional Alterations in the Transition from Acute to Chronic Neck Pain, a Resting State Functional MRI Study. Again, so we scanned the brain here in 86 people who had acute neck pain and 89 people with chronic neck pain. And I want to see what are the differences happening in the brain. Is there any difference between the acute and chronic pain patients in terms of what's going on in the brain? And yes, there was. So I'm going to take you through some of the data here for what they found. Okay, so we go down to the results and discussion here. And they say here, the best of their knowledge, no previous imaging research had concurrently gathered this MRI data of the brain to evaluate the progression of brain function and gray matter structure changes during the transition from acute to chronic neck pain. So in the same actual article. So this is the first time they looked at acute and chronic pain in terms of functional MRI in the same study here. And so what we found here is that it says our study's results represented the first evidence to suggest that in comparison to individuals with acute neck pain, so just think acute symptoms, patients suffering from chronic neck pain exhibited distinct alterations in the structure and function of brain regions implicated in sensory discrimination, emotional motivation, and cognitive appraisal, and really including this prefrontal cortex, which I'll talk about more specifically here. Remember these two areas of your brain. You just need to remember two areas of your brain. to keep it simple, the prefrontal cortex region and the limbic brain. The limbic brain includes your amygdala, which is your emotional generator, includes your hippocampus, your memory center, thalamus, and other areas. And that limbic brain goes straight down into your body through your autonomic nervous system. Your prefrontal cortex has intimate connections with the limbic brain. Those have been altered a lot of times, and that's what we're trying to shift and change. Okay. And they say here that research indicates that the risk of shifting from acute pain to chronic pain may be linked to the limbic system. Okay, we have data on this with low back pain. Okay, we see that changing there and changes in the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex, like they say here, is a key area of your brain in governing emotions, right? So it's one area we talk about a lot with your emotions, cognitive abilities, and the perception of pain. The perception is so important. I always talk about this with the people I work with, that your perception of this is number one. This is your belief, this is your interpretation, this is the meaning and perception you give to the pain and the situation and what you're going through. If you give it negative meaning, meaning it's bad, it's not good, it's dangerous, it's threatening, well, that's going to fire up these brain areas and going to contribute to the pain, okay, to the production and the persistence of pain. And what we see here is that when the prefrontal cortex area has been changed and altered, it can contribute to the progression of pain from acute to a persistent chronic state. Okay, and that's what we see here. And they talk about pain being characterized as an uncomfortable sensory and emotional response linked to actual or potential tissue damage. So remember, you don't need to have tissue damage. In many cases, people don't with chronic pain. It's literally brain changes that have occurred are the main cause to the symptoms in the body now. Remember, pain is not only sensory, it's also emotional response. So that's where the emotions come in. And they say here that the pain integrates aspects of sensation, emotion, and cognition. So thoughts, beliefs, and these emotions. And what we see here is that the prefrontal cortex, right? There's two main areas. There's what's called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. This is the frontal lobe of your brain, cognitive brain, thinking brain, perceiving brain, okay, decision-making brain, emotional regulating area of your brain. What they find here and what they found in the study and other studies that this part of your brain exhibits structural and functional anomalies with the pain, with chronic pain, especially in the study of chronic neck pain. And it highlights that they highlight that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex has involvement in the development and maintenance of chronic pain. They say here, firstly, chronic pain is commonly linked to elevated stress levels, right? So we talked a lot about how stress can cause these physical symptoms in your body. And the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is essential in managing these stress responses. So we need to improve our ability to manage stress. Remember the famous saying, stress is 10% what happens to you, 90% how you react to it or respond to it. This comes into play here. We need to get the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex going and you improving your ability to regulate stress and handle stress when it comes so that doesn't get out of control and then start to contribute to symptoms in the body. The second thing they mention here is that chronic pain sufferers often face emotional and cognitive challenges such as anxiety and depression, which we know both those things are major contributors to chronic symptoms. And the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the key player in the governance of these processes, meaning regulating anxiety and depression. So those are two other areas we need to get down is anxiety and depression. Okay. It says here these detected irregularities in the prefrontal cortex, especially the dorsolateral part, among chronic neck patients in this study may point to a compromised capacity for emotional and cognitive regulation, which could contribute to a self-perpetuating cycle that exacerbates the experience of pain. So we need to improve this, everybody. This is part of our work, right? We're changing the brain, not the body. We're working on shifting this cortical region to get better control, to downregulate stress, reduce anxiety, reduce depression, improve the capacity for regulation, which we can. It's neuroplastic. It's not fixed. It's not like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's where this area is dead or a stroke or something like that. This is an area that can be improved and strengthened, and we need to strengthen it for our healing. Okay. And it says here that, remember this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex part of your brain, it contributes to what's called descending pain modulation, which is really crucial for quieting down the pain signals. So that's called descending inhibition. And again, this comes from, I think, your belief and knowing from your evidence that there's nothing wrong with you. When the more you can really believe that, know that, and see you're fine, that can cause descending inhibition. We see this a lot when people are told, "Hey, you're okay. We don't have any information, no data pointing to anything wrong with you." A lot of these people can get what's called descending inhibition going, which means quieting down of the limbic brain and then quieting down of the symptoms. Something we want to work on as well that help people work on. Okay. So what we see here again, chronic neck pain from this particular study, any disruption in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex structure or function can impede the effective activation of pain modulating pathways. Again, lack of descending inhibition results in intensification and persistence of pain. I want to pause for a moment and say, hey, this is all your brain, everybody. I'm talking about your brain doing this to your body. I'm talking about the brain as the thing that's creating and sustaining the symptoms you have. It's not your body, but we can change this brain. The brain is neuroplastic. Okay, that's what we call them, neuroplastic symptoms. They come from your brain and they can be changed by your brain. But the focus point needs to be on the brain, not the body. But like I said, modern medicine's not there yet. They're not going to tell you that because they're not scanning the brain. But I'm telling you, the research is showing you the information, and we can take it here because we understand this and use it for our benefit. One other area of your brain I want to highlight today before we finish is what's called the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. That's another part of your prefrontal cortex that's also closely linked with chronic pain and chronic conditions, and it's integrated with your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It's also involved in pain regulation, and what they found here is that imaging research indicates a key role of the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex in managing negative emotions, right? So this is, we get to the emotional area now that we start to regulate emotion, express emotion, release emotion, let emotion go, that this could be altered in people with chronic pain. Okay, and this says that the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex seems to act as an intermediary in adjusting emotional responses and pain sensations. And again, what they found in this study, like they've seen in other ones, is that it's altered again. There's an alteration in that part of the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex compared to people with acute pain. The chronic pain people had alterations, which leads us to believe again, and this Dr. Sarno was right, that these negative emotions, when we're not being regulated or managed well, can contribute to chronic symptoms, things like anxiety, depression, other emotions. Okay. So I hope this makes sense, everybody. I really want to bring in this idea of the brain here. Again, I keep saying it's your brain, not your body, and show you the evidence that this is true so that you can take this and say, okay, I get it now. I'm not going to be told this information anywhere else because the doctors aren't doing brain scans, but you can learn it from me and say, okay, let me start focusing on shifting my brain, regulating emotions, reducing stress, getting belief and control over the system, right? It's called cortical control, descending pain modulation. And again, if you're looking for more help on how to do this, more specifically for you, where you're struggling, for you, reach out. This is what I do for a living, try to help people, get people on track to overcome these conditions. So you can go to thepainpt.com and you get more information there. Thank you all for being here today. The link to the paper is here in the notes, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.